So the purpose of our time together in the next half hour is to find out a little bit more from you in the audience, what you're thinking about where our priorities should be next. We've gotten so many resources, so many mentions of doing more work and having more conversations in different areas. So we certainly are going to review everything that we see in the Q&A and the chat, and we will have a summary report, fortunately, coming up within about 6 weeks. But I think what we'd like to do now is to launch a series of 3 polls. They're asking you your advice on our priorities for where we should go next. So Priya, are you ready for the first poll?
Yes, just one moment.
Okay, thanks. So while Priya's pulling up this is Slido, right?
Yes.
We're going to have another word cloud. So the question, I'm going to tee it up, is based on today's discussions. What biases do you think the field of HSR should address first? So it'll be up in just a moment. This is another free text where you will be able to type in whatever you think. Go to slido.com, enter this number, and the poll will come right up, we hope. Okay. So we're going to keep this open for a little while. Abdul, anything that you're seeing right off the bat? It's a little hard when it keeps moving, but.
You know, I think the size means that there's multiple responses, right? And I think just the variety of opportunities and challenges are telling, right? That this is why we have a multi-hour workshop today. And I think one of the things I'm thinking about is our recent work with the advisory group on DEI or Academy Health.
So I heard someone use the term yesterday. I see structural racism. I heard somebody use the term everyday racism. So supremacy of quantitative methods.
Funding was a question that came up in my panel right now, and that's also noted here. We did not get to that, I think, adequately.
Well, we certainly touched on it several times. It's still moving, so let's give it another 15 seconds or so, and then we can start talking about it. We'll keep an eye on the time. We're going to try to spend about 10 minutes on each of the 3 questions. Okay, it looks like it's stable. Thanks, everybody. So certainly racism came up right away and just sat right in the middle, meaning multiple responses. It got a little bigger and then a little smaller. Certainly dealing with racism in all of its aspects. Thanks, Priya.
Margot, can we also call on other panelists if they're
Yes, I was going to ask. We can also encourage people to put comments in the chat. But are there other panelists who have access to a mic that would like to comment?
Well, let me maybe key it up, and I'll go back to funding, because when I have the mic, it's it's great I have the chance to drive what we talk about. But I am interested in funding, right? As you know, and as some of you know, I used to be at NIH. I was in the external program there, and I've been on the other side of the fence now, working with a lot of different agencies and recipients of funds. And I think Reggie, you said up front, a lot of funding in your experience comes from foundations, right, and non-federal agencies until more recent times, and that's barring, of course, NIMHD, where it's part of their core focus. And I wonder if you or others have a thought about how we can really drive greater funding support for addressing anti-racism in HSR, but also methodologically, right, on how to eliminate bias, because that elimination of bias, in my mind, touches on the value we get from data writ large, right? And it touches on, and again, I'm thinking about big data and what Suzanne shared, and how there's a lot of risk, right? We know there's risk to both commercial, federal, and nonprofit organizations around how they understand what the meaning of data is. And that's, I think, at the heart of bias, and it touches on funding. Any thoughts on that from our panelists or the audience?
I mean, I can offer a little bit of comment. This is Juanita. I know like NIH has published, I think it's 2020, the publication came out talking about kind of bias in funding for health disparities research. And some of what came out of that is that, so when we talk about kind of racism or bias and funding, it's twofold, right? There's the PI, right? And kind of the investigators that are conducting the research, and the biases and lack of diversity in the PIs, but then there's also the type of research, right? So the health equity and the health disparities research. And then there's the intersection of the two, which is quite large. Diverse PIs, PIs of color, PIs from ethnic and minority groups conducting health disparities research. And that analysis is documented and published.
I put something in the chat around sort of workforce diversity. I think we have lots of efforts that focus on recruitment. We don't focus as much on retention. And so I think ensuring not only that we get more racial and ethnic minorities in the decision-making room, but that we also focus on how do we retain those individuals, from individuals that are PIs to individuals who are making the funding decisions.
Absolutely, Reggie. And I think that we know that retention is not just about helping people adapt to the dominant culture, it's about changing the dominant culture so it's more inclusive. And that, I think, is becoming more challenging, or is a recognized challenge. So I think, Jamita, please, yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at this word cloud, and I think it really just strengthens the arguments that I've heard today, that we have nearly 300 people who may have participated in this word cloud, and racism is at the center of the data methods, where really trying to understand what's undergirding the methods that are being used, maybe as tools of racism, not intentionally, right? And so this would be a great opportunity for funders to really think through, how can we really focus on methods that are decolonizing, that are really doing this work of repairing what's been done in the past. And so I think there's a great opportunity here, just looking at this word cloud.
Absolutely. I think you summed it up really well. Thanks, Jamita. Shall we move to the next poll?
I was going to pick on Jamita a little and ask if she had any specific advice for funders then on what they might do.
Diversify their workforce.
Yeah, I mean, I say all the time, I'm glad that Reggie said it. It's definitely retention. There are many different reasons why I think about, why people are on the tenure track, why they're not on the tenure track, why they choose certain careers, if they are from a marginalized group or a historically excluded group. And so understanding those dynamics, right? Understanding that if you're in a job where 90% of your job requires research monies, but you're part of a group that doesn't get that, that's a very real issue for a lot of tenure track researchers in academia. Understanding that you might be someone who's from this group who is working with data that has problems, but you can't change it, and the frustrations that might be there. So there are multiple different perspectives, and it would be great to have maybe, a very focused funds that looked at ways in which we can create opportunities for more diverse representation, regardless of what identity it is, around different issues, but it looks like race is a major issue. I say, of course, but looking at this list and really understanding what that looks like in health services research. And I think investing in retention, but also in recruitment at the graduate level. It doesn't just start when you're done with school. It starts with who's writing the textbooks, what frameworks and what theories are we continuing to perpetuate, what algorithms are we using, what formulas, and we don't really do the other work that's required. That means really interrogating, where did that come from? Is it useful? Is it really measuring what we think it's going to measure?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thanks
That's really
again,
helpful.
Kameelan. Yeah,
Yeah, it made me
absolutely.
think about like initiatives around NIH, and NSF has done a lot around both around team science, around breaking down silos and disciplines. And it seems like there's already approaches and methods to start shifting the culture of academia research to take a lens of anti-racism to it as well. So
And that's a really good segue, Abdul. I was looking at Deborah's question about supremacy of quantitative methods. We have a kind of a myth that quantitative means objective. And so maybe Priya, if you could pull up the next poll. I know Suzanne touched on this, Lisa and others have touched on this today, but will somebody speak to the supremacy of quantitative methods?
Jamita.
I'm happy to jump in. I was about to type it. One thing I always tell students when I would teach research methods is that what question are you asking? That should dictate what method you use.
Mm-hmm.
And often the questions that are more meaningful to help us understand difference, to understand disparity, require us to look within group and ask specific questions that we might not be able to get from a measure.
Mm-hmm.
And so where qualitative makes sense. It doesn't mean that qualitative is better or quantitative is worse, but it does mean that what types of questions are we asking, and are our methods matching the questions that need to be asked?
Thank you.
Maybe I'll just add on to that. I think that was an excellent response, and I completely agree. I think that in the context of CBPR, we often honor research methodologies that are perhaps indigenous to that group. And traditional research sometimes is qualitative. So storytelling, for example, can be used as a qualitative research methodology in communities where perhaps experiences of research in the past have been horrible and damaging. So I think giving value to both is really important.
Yeah, I've noticed a shift too, because keep in mind, 10 years ago, I was at NIH as a behavioral and social scientist in a biomedical research institution. And so that, led to some interesting conversations with colleagues around interdisciplinary science. But when I think now about where science is evolving and how it goes back to who's funding science, right? There's a lot of research that's happening outside of the traditional research enterprise, NIH, HHS, the large foundations in industry, right? And they've been pioneers in some ways, taking learnings from behavioral social science into like personas, into, these different approaches where it's very qualitative, and yet it's couched in a different language and dialect. And I think we all recognize that the term, the acronym CBPR has certain meaning depending on who you're speaking with as a funder. So I think I go back to, Lisa, that slide you had, which is decomposing CBPR. If you want to do CBPR, pitch it in different ways, right? Pitch it into what the value is and the value in terms of the funder or the recipient of your message. So we have a new word cloud here, don't we, Margot? How will you learned?
We do, and I'll bet Reggie is very happy that clarify language is right in the middle of this word cloud, since we've heard this from him many times and from others. It's really important for us to clarify what we're talking about. And so one of the things you may have noticed as a participant today is that people defined their terms, gave a source when possible, but that's something that we will also be, Academy Health will be releasing a glossary that has some of the key terms, and it will be an open document. So once that's released with our report, we hope that we will engage everybody and invite you to update and provide more resources on that.
Yeah, I love it because taking a biomedical lens, you look at, for example, the early days of the whole genomics research efforts, right? And they also did, I think, an important job trying to share the meaning, the concepts of the different terms in genomics. And you've seen that in proteomics and microbiome and so on. And similarly, I think in health services research, this is important, right? For any new and evolving research area, but particularly one where we are talking about concepts that people struggle with, right? That we ourselves, I think, struggle with to explain and have a shared understanding.
So it's interesting, Abdul, as you were talking, I was looking, I see kind of the whole life cycle of research reflected in the word cloud, from thinking about your design, thinking about how you frame your research questions, making sure that you have input from communities, looking at your code, looking at the bias in code. And that's a real challenge that I think, because so many things are implicit, and particularly for those who are using secondary data and you don't know the provenance of the data. So there are going to be some recommendations coming from our advisory group that talk about that, talk about declaring or having a statement of principles that talks about your source data or acknowledges biases.
I would like to see more around dissemination, implementation, application, though. I think so much of what we do in HSR is needed, right? And I think it's difficult because how do you get funded? It's through discovering and advancing new research, right? New research findings, but it's that application piece that is going to, I think, really drive the spread of our science into practice, right? At its base.
And Abdul, I think that is by far one of the most challenging aspects, especially, from say somebody developing methods, and where you could just write a paper. So it is much more challenging to implement and work with people on the ground. And I don't think that is really acknowledged sometimes within the research community, but let alone with funding and resources.
And to Jamita's point about people being overwhelmed with requests to review, one of the things that Academy Health has been thinking about is how to diversify the reviewer pools for our own conferences, for our journals, for anything that we do. So that's something that we'll definitely be thinking about.
And Margot, I think that glossary is not just great for the HSR community, but that will likely help, others from engineering, statistics, computer science. There's a lot of interest in engaging in real world problems and working on, social impact. And I think that will help, others, speak, the common language and get on the same page and be more productive.
Well, thanks for that, Suzanne. We don't know who we don't know. And so thank you for suggesting some of these other fields. That's great. Abdul, any last words before we go to the next poll?
I'm just looking at some of the comments and questions, so we can move on whenever you're ready.
Okay, Priya, if we could have the third poll. So the question is, so you can be kind of thinking about it, what are the topics or methods that you would like to learn more about? This will help us in our future programming. It might help all of you in your courses, kind of thinking about this group of folks and what they're really interested in.
Margot, I know the Paradigm Project findings and activities have been mentioned, and they've been quite relevant to some of the discourse. Are we going to be able to share a link to the project page to be able to share that as a resource?
Sure. Thank you for bringing that up.
And I would just mention, I put in one link, Abdul, but thank you. We will send it as part of all the resources. There's a lot being produced by the Paradigm Project. So yeah, we very much want folks to not just know it's there, but interact with it and get engaged.
Thank you. Thanks, Lisa. And Kristen has just put in a link, and I'm happy to let you know that our professional writer, Alwyn, who is going to be writing up this workshop, has also been writing the issue briefs for Paradigm. So one of the things that we will be doing moving forward is looking to see how we can harmonize the recommendations that come out of today's event, Paradigm, and our advisory group recommendations. So still seeing some movement here.
Qualitative methods front and center.
Yeah, interesting.
And I think subsets of that, right? Like PAR.
Mm-hmm.
Big data methods too. I would love to see bringing together the qualitative and quantitative. I think, and it's in the lens of this new world of big data that we're all, I think, embracing and struggling and intersecting with in different ways. And I think as we look at bias, as we look at anti-racism, as we look at the work that we're talking about today, that is front and central, right? Because I find myself having conversations about Google and the missteps they made around their leading researcher, right, around her publication in algorithmic bias at Google. And, you know, it's playing out in multiple ways, right? And I think we as HSR researchers, practitioners, you're all leaders. We need to get more conversant in this with the folks that we interact with.
Mm-hmm. And it's a very broad audience. We're finding HSR is multi-sector already. And I think that one of my take-home messages today is how many other kind of adjoining or adjacent fields there are that we could collaborate with and learn from. And Lucy has just posted a comment on the OBSSR report, Office of Behavioral and Social Sciences Research at NIH. Thanks, Lucy. Oh, also, Jordan has raised the issue of participatory design. Think about participatory research, think about universal design, human factors, usability. I think that's a topic of another workshop. So any of our other speakers today have any comments on this word cloud?
I have one final statement. I think one thing that that is important to discuss in this context is, you know, we've all been sort of, you know, in support of this topic and talking more about it. I think methods around how to address colleagues that may not necessarily be as interested in health disparities and structural racism, or how to navigate barriers to moving your work forward in this area. I don't necessarily have any pearls of wisdom or any sort of best strategies here, but I think, you know, a more robust discussion around how best to navigate challenging discussions with colleagues that may not necessarily be on board with addressing these issues.
Yeah, thank you for that, Reggie. We've talked a lot about having a community of practice, but I think some really specific challenges and strategies for dealing with them would be really, really helpful.
Well, Margot or Lisa, is there anything that would be relevant mentioning coming out of the DEI and Health Services Research Advisory Group and recommendations? Because it seems like Reggie's comment is smack dab where, and he was a part of the group as well.
Well, I don't want to. No, I just, you know, Abdul, I just want to use this to, you know, drum roll and wait till it's released, because we really want to encourage everybody who, you know, participated today. And even if this is your first time getting engaged with Academy Health, there's a lot going on here. And so let's just say there's a lot of work still to do, and we're very committed to it. And Margot is leading us on this journey to really address racism, structural racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion in our field.
Well, it does take a community to do this work. And so I really want to thank everybody who's participated. Thank my colleague Abdul for being such a great co-chair in developing these recommendations. And the recommendations really touch on a lot of the issues that have come up today in terms of being a catalyst for change, being making public commitments, looking at your language, thinking about data sources, being accountable, having accountability systems and public transparency, and also thinking about some other kinds of governance issues like a council of funders to coordinate the funding streams that come to these researchers. And I think one of the most important recommendations that comes out of this report is the need to place higher value. Funding is one thing, but also prestige and acknowledgement within the field of the importance of this work is one of the take-home messages from the report. So we will be in touch when that's released. We hope that you'll take a look at it. It's about 20 pages. And we've worked really hard to synthesize a lot of issues that I think that you've seen on the board today. So Abdul, would you like to close this out?
Sure. Thank you for the sneak preview, Margot and Lisa. I think we're all waiting for that publication. So I think that was a helpful way to really put a bow on today's proceedings, because you have, I think, mentioned, discussed, reflected on many of, if not all, I think, of the aspects of our report in different ways, right? And I think when we look at today, for me personally, this means a lot because it's also the end of the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. So today is the day of Eid al-Adha, and Eid al-Adha is meant to be commemorating a festival of sacrifice to your fellow, your families, to your fellow community members, to society at large. And so, thank you all. I really enjoyed the proceedings and I learned a lot. Margot?